Eric Campbell manages the MGO program for DNR. Took over, I guess, just in the last year from Chris Judy. We've worked with he and Chris for 10 years now. Eric may not know, but we were probably the first river outside of the Tredavon to apply to become a sponsor through the Severn River Association to sponsor all these oysters. And it's just grown from there. Eric, I think, wants to talk about oyster restoration all over the bay, and I certainly want to hear his update.
So when we started MGO, three main goals. One was to engage the public, raise awareness, get everybody out there talking about oysters, talking about the bay. We also wanted to give people a way to help enhance the sanctuaries, give back to the bay, and help the health of the Chesapeake. And we wanted to involve a whole lot of different kinds of people. And over the years, I mean, that's just what we've been able to do. It's been fantastic. People from all different walks of life, you know, from private citizens to corporations to government agencies. And it's been, I mean, everything we've hoped and more back when Chris Judy started this just about 10 years ago. With MGO, unlike other oyster gardening programs that are out there, MGO focuses on the tributary net, size. We try to work with larger groups of people rather than necessarily individuals. As Bob said, SRA has been a fantastic partner here in the Severn for the entire time we've been working. We have groups like this kind of all over the bay that have helped and taken up growing oysters. And of course, those oysters that we're planting, they're going on in sanctuary bottom. They're not going to be harvested. They're going to grow up. They're going to filter the water. They're going to make reefs and communities and just be a fantastic boon for the areas they're planted. And kind of the big one is stewardship. We want people to take ownership of the oysters. We want people to take ownership of the bars they're planting and feel a connection to the bay and the environmental effort that's being put in here. And here's just a few of the partners that we've worked with over the years. And I mean, it's been again, fantastic program. We've had great input from all different walks of life and different government agencies. The Corps of Engineers has been very helpful. Of course, Oyster Recovery Partnership, we can't work without these days. They've just been absolutely fantastic and taking over a lot of the parts of the day-to-day MGO. And of course, all of you, the waterfront property owners, the people who actually have the cages at your piers. It's been a joy and an honor to get to meet a lot of you over the years and be able to talk at places like this where everybody's excited about it. So back in 2008, we had the original kickoff. It was just the Tredavon River. And that was taken care of by Chris all by himself. 858 cages. And then today we're in just about 30 tributaries. We have just over 8,000 cages across the bay. It's been 30 tributaries for a few years now. I was hoping we could kick it up to 31, but this year we had one join and one drop out, so still sitting at 30, although we're welcoming in the St. Clements Bay group down off the Potomac River as a new group today. They just handed out their first 100 cages this week. Here's just a little bit. I know people often have questions about, how do the oysters do in the cages? What does it do for them? So in the cage and then on the bottom, we see anywhere from 50 to 80% survival. You got to remember these spat are coming in very tiny, and that may seem like a lot of mortality, but if we're planting these on an open bar, it can often be much higher because that cage is protecting them from a lot of predation and a lot of other issues that that they're not going to be having to face because you're taking care of them, you're keeping them clean, you're keeping them protected. So after after 2 years, your cage with about 500 spat is going to be about 125 to 200 oysters, which is actually a really good conversion. A lot of places with spat plantings from Horn Point, if it's planted on the bottom, we may see 80–90% mortality in the first couple of years, where it's definitely going to be lower in the cages, just because they're being taken care of, they're being watched, and they're being kept from predation. So just a little bit about how the MGO program works. In the beginning of the program, and probably including up to about 90 to 98% of the cages that are still out there were produced by Maryland Correctional Enterprises. DNR bought the cage material, and in conjunction with MCE, we had prisoners actually out there constructing the cages for the program. Today, cage construction duties has been turned over to ORP, Oyster Recovery Partnership, and they're not only taking care of cage construction, they've also taken over the financing of cage construction. So that's one area where DNR is not putting any more funds into the program, and ORP is raising their own money to be able to take care of that, which we're very, very grateful for. The spat itself is produced at the Horn Point Hatchery over on the Eastern Shore in Cambridge. DNR purchases shucked shells from shucking houses around the state. We store them, we age them, make sure they're nice and clean and they're not going to cause any issues. And then they're sent to Horn Point, where ORP will load up the cages. Mutt Merritt and his crew will spawn the oysters and put the spat in there. The pictures here are all actually steel cages, which are used for restoration activities. And of course, you guys are probably a lot more familiar with the oyster bags that will come out to you guys and get divided up. And then just this time of year, just this week for a lot of people, the ORP will bring the spat out and deliver it. Different groups around the bay kind of do their things a little differently. Some meet up in one spot and everybody comes and fills their cages. Other people go pier to pier and drop stuff off. I mean, it's kind of fantastic how all the different groups have kind of come up with their own way of doing things. And just some nice pictures. Number of groups are hiring watermen these days, which is also fantastic, kind of bring them into the program. I mean, everybody, enjoys it and everybody loves it. And then in the spring, after about 9 months, of course, all those cages come back and all that spat gets planted out in, in sanctuaries. I think there's, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, you've got like 4 sites in the Severn?
One sanctuary.
Well, one sanctuary, but I think they're planted across 4 sites. No? Well, Chris lied to me.
400 or 500 ducks.
Right. And so since 2008, MGO has planted about just over 12 million spat, which is a real nice number. I mean, back when we started it, I don't think we had any idea that the program was going to take off and be as big and successful as it has. And we're very thankful for that. And, it's been a great boon to all the different sanctuaries where we have groups planting. Here's a quick look about what a river looks like. This is the Tread Avon. And as Chris worked it over the years, he had actually GPS numbers for all the different docks that were growing oysters. It just kind of gives you an idea of what a river looks like and how those cages are distributed. And it's just kind of a neat seeing. It's pretty much across the whole river. And of course, here's a river you're a little more familiar with. Again, this was one Chris gave me with 4 places that you guys plant, but if you're only planting in one spot, okay? But with any program, there are some issues, there are some challenges. One is it's very labor intensive, and that's why community groups like this and volunteers across the state have been kind of a key key component to everything we do. I mean, we couldn't do it, and this program wouldn't exist without you folks. And of course, things like fouling and silt. I mean, these are kind of what, being in the cages, these are the advantages that these oysters have over, ones that are planted out in the wild, because they have you taking care of them. They have you knocking the silt off and, cleaning off the cages so there's plenty of water flow. And of course, I mean, we've all seen, the occasional cage hanging out there in the winter. But these are, the issues that can plague a program if people aren't attentive and if they're not, really into it. But fortunately, I mean, all the growers I've seen have been absolutely fantastic, and it's really, you guys are giving these oysters a fantastic head start. Okay, and just looking at some different aspects of the program and how they've done over the years. So, so first year, 1 tributary. Now we're in over 30 tributaries. About a 10-fold increase in the number of cages. Just an idea of the kind of the costs behind the program. A cage full of spat costs about $30 from construction to production of the spat. So, I mean, and it just kind of gives you a sense of the efficiency. So the better they survive, the less each oyster is going to cost. So that's another important reason for, taking care of your cages, because the better they survive, the more efficient and cost-effective the program becomes. And of course, I mean, everybody's pulled up their cages and looked and just seen all the life that's in there. From the bryozoans growing on the cage to the fish and the grass shrimp and everybody else in there. Each cage becomes a mini community, a mini oyster reef. And once they're planted, I mean, that carries over onto the bottom. And this, I think, this for me is the key part of MGO, and actually the most important part. And that's the stewardship. That's everybody kind of taking ownership of the oysters, focusing on what they can do to help the bay, and working together, telling people, telling your friends, telling your family, getting them excited because you're excited, and helping the program grow, and having more people involved in helping the bay. So finally, about MGO. The program is still growing, and it's still very popular. I don't think I've ever heard a bad word about the program, which is nice, unlike most of our programs. And that the stewardship and commitment, again, is just is the part that's kind of near and dear to me. Seeing people involved, seeing people excited, seeing people passionate about it, and of course the oysters you're planting. Those sites are enhanced. Those sites are better than they were beforehand, and they're forming a community, and they're forming, a reef and life, and all kinds of great stuff. And but what else is going on? I don't think anybody has heard anything lately about any restoration projects that we're better looking at. Let's just jump back real quick. Before 2010, DNR had sanctuaries all across the state. They were very small. They were mostly like one bar, one project sites. Not a lot of great bottom. A lot of marginal areas. And then in 2010, with the Oyster Restoration and Aquaculture Plan, we not only in opening up half the state to aquaculture, which was closed before, we closed a lot of new sanctuaries and expanded old sanctuaries. And we went from 9% of the oyster bottom closed up in sanctuaries to 24%. And that also includes, this one, 50% of what we call the best bars. This was a study back in 2008 that looked at all the bars in the state and ranked them as productive, most productive. And now the sanctuaries contain half of the most productive bars in the state, whereas before it was only a couple percent. And for when we're doing restoration in the sanctuaries, it starts out pretty much the exact same way as the spat that you guys get. DNR buys the shell, we age it, we send it to Horn Point. ORP and University of Maryland turned that into spat for us, and we plant that at sites all around the bay. And in 2014, with the Chesapeake Watershed Agreement, the Chesapeake Bay Program member states agreed to, for their oyster goal, to restore 10 tributaries with oysters by 2025. 5 in Maryland, 5 in Virginia. In Maryland, the first one we undertook was Harris Creek, which is now complete. And then the second 2 tributaries were Little Trout Tank and Tread Avon. Now, we know the last 2 tributaries are currently in the selection process. The Oyster Advisory Commission was tasked with looking at all the different sanctuaries, ranking them, and coming up with their suggestion. OAC was able to whittle it down to 8, and they passed their recommendations on to DNR. So the decision on the last 2 sanctuaries currently lies with the Secretary of DNR. He's been given the OAC suggestion, he's been given all the data and information we have, and now we're just waiting for a final decision. When's that decision going to come? We don't know. But we're hoping soon, because we got a lot of work to do. And this is just to give you an idea of what one of these large-scale restoration projects look like. This is Harris Creek. In Harris Creek, we restored 375 acres of bottom and planted over 2 billion oysters. These restoration sites include anywhere from bottom that was already good, that just got spat on shell, to areas that were marginal habitat and then received either stone or shell to harden them up and then spat on shell. And of course, we finished this one up in 2015, and our 3-year survey has already taken place, and 100% of the restoration sites meet the goal of 15 oysters per square meter, and 50% of the sites are all the way up at 50 oysters per square meter, so which is absolutely fantastic.
Has the quality of the water improved?
That's not something we've specifically looked at yet. I know that the Resource Assessment Service has continuous water quality monitors in there, but we haven't particularly looked at it yet. You know, we've been focusing on the actual bars themselves and how healthy the oysters are. And this picture gives you a little bit of an idea of what we do. Of course, on the left is what was there before, kind of marginal habitat, little firm, scattered shell. Then we come in, we plant, and we've got some nice oyster habitat there. And it's been fantastic. I mean, there's been bumps in the road along with the projects, and of course we got 2 more tributaries, of which, of course, as you know, the Severn River is in the running for one of these last 2. But we'll see. And that's it for me. If anybody has any questions.
Have you seen evidence of natural reproduction in, say, Harris Creek?
Yes, absolutely. During the 3-year update sampling, we found spat on the material we planted, on the stone, on the shell. So yeah, I mean, there is reproduction in there. I mean, Harris Creek historically has been a very productive area, but for a number of years it had declined a great deal, and we are seeing signs of life stirring in there that which is nice.
Question over here.
Yes, I have 4 cages on my pier, and I think this is a really great program, but I don't live on the Severn River, and I would like to know if there's anything that I can do as an individual to have oysters in my own creek, like for example, there was, I think yesterday's Capital was on the front page was an article about some guy growing oysters for the South River.
South River Federation.
Yeah.
They're another one of our members.
So, is there anything an individual person can do, even if we were willing to shell out $30 a pop for bags of oysters and keep them ourselves, in addition to what we do for the Severn River?
Basically, I mean, part of my job is being the first point of contact for people coming in and asking questions like this. What can I do? And first thing I do is check if there's an active, if you're in the same area as an active group, so I can plug you in with them. And if you're not, a lot of the time I'll refer those people over to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, because they have an oyster gardening program. They use cages very similar to ours, and they tend to work more with individuals. And but it's the same kind of thing. You'll go, you'll get spat, and you'll meet up at a certain time of year. You'll hand off your spat, and they'll get planted in the sanctuary. Is it going to be in your creek? Probably not. The problem with that, we try to avoid, everybody and everybody kind of having their own little spot here, there, and everywhere. We think it's better to concentrate the stuff, or the spat on shell, so you've got a little bit more of a chance of success. And I mean, the thing is, we can't protect a lot of these plantings. If you go out and you plant in an area that's open, there's nothing that we can do to guarantee that those, oysters won't get harvested or something like that. That's why we focus all our efforts in the sanctuaries, and again, try and concentrate them down into nice, dense plantings.
So if I could just follow up. Let's suppose I dumped a lot of cinder blocks under my pier so it doesn't touch boats or people, and then dumped a lot of bags of oyster spat.
You can do that. You are nobody can go in and go under your pier.
Right.
So I know, again, Chesapeake Bay Foundation actually works with a lot of homeowners to build reefs under their piers.
Okay. Thank you.
And I know a lot of people have done that. And yes, I mean, you can absolutely do that. And for stuff like that, again, I think the Chesapeake Bay Foundation is a great place to start. There's a fellow over there, his name's Patrick Bayall. He runs their oyster gardening program. If you like, you can give me contact information. I can get you connected up with him. And they do great work along those lines.
Okay, thank you, Eric.
Yeah.
Have you had any issues with poaching on our sites?
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, Severn River, probably not. Your sites, the Severn River's been closed so long, both as a sanctuary and before that for pollution. Nobody's going to be coming up here. Other sites and other rivers and other areas that may be a little more tempting, we don't have anything that says yes or no. I mean, it's entirely possible, but I would like to hope people are better.
How long does it take an oyster to grow from a spat to table grade?
It's about 3 inches in 3 years, is the general rule of thumb.
But how long? How many years or months or days or whatever?
Right. To get to 3 inches, it takes about 3 years. Yep.
Yeah, and another question, the amount of mud in the creek, does that have an effect on these, or do they survive the mud that?
I mean, if they're getting covered up and smothered, it'll definitely kill them off. One of the things that we hope about the sites that are planting is they're a little bit above the mud, or in areas that aren't going to get silted over so heavily. We try and be very picky about where we're planting, just for those kind of reasons. And also, again, as I said earlier, it's why it's important to make sure you're cleaning out your cages and you're shaking off the mud. Because if they do get buried, that sediment will act as a block to any spat settling. And I mean, ultimately, if it gets heavy enough, it can smother the oysters.
I think you said a while ago that about 80 or 90% survive. Why the big high mortality?
A lot of it's predation, especially when they're small. And then as they get bigger, of course, depending on where they're planted in the bay, Dermo or MSX can kill them off. But I mean, some of it comes from handling. Again, when these spat are moved, they're being very, very tiny. So I mean, it's a whole bunch of different things. There's again, some will get crushed as they're being loaded on the boat and washed off. Some are going to get eaten by crabs or rays or stylocus or any number of things. Some will get smothered. When the shell lands, the oysters that are on the bottom in the mud, they'll probably die. The ones on top will grow. So I mean, it's all kinds of stuff.
Is there anything that private citizens can do to help the Secretary choose the Severn River?
I'll talk about that.
Thank you. Bob Sager.
Does anybody Who looks at the Seven Rivers Reef? I mean, we've been dumping oysters there a long time. What's it look like? Is this worth it? I mean, where's that?
I don't know if we've actually sampled
gets
it.
monitored.
It is
By John Payne.
Okay.
And how does it look? I mean,
94% survival.
but is it huge? How big is it? Because unless we got to tell the people that participate, you know, they're dumping their oysters, you know, what the reef looks like and some sort of evidence that, I mean, I assume this is doing something good, but it'd be nice to have something to
University of
show.
Maryland reports on it, and they reported 94% survival. We do better than the rest of the state.
A couple of years ago, the Painter Lab folks, who are the ones who monitor oyster reefs, the ORP plants all over the bay, they came over and sampled reefs in the Severn, including our sanctuary reef. And Ken Painter came to one of these meetings and made a presentation. And he basically said we had A+ oysters out on the reef. They were big, they were healthy, and while we don't have survival or methods to monitor survival, he thought they were all doing very, very well.
He had an average survival of 5 years on the reefs in the river.
Yes, he had evidence of 5-year-old oysters at that
That
point.
was the average.
And was it
5-year
average?
average. And incidentally, a 5-year-old oyster filters 108 gallons a day, as opposed to the 50 on the 3-year.
So there was a lot of evidence he collected that we are doing very well on our sanctuary, and there are other reefs planted in the Severn that he also samples, and they're all doing well because we don't have the diseases affecting us at all. So if we can get past that first year or two of survival, the odds are very good they're going to grow and continue to filter our waters.
How long do oysters live, Bob?
Oh. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we've got, oyster shells that we've been able to date. Oysters go in 20 years. I mean, it all depends on how healthy they stay, and these days probably not that long. With especially with Dermo and MSX, if we have bad disease years, tends to kill off the bigger ones pretty quick. But I mean, they can actually get fairly old.
Painter said 10 to 12 years is his expectation, where there's no predation. We don't really have any predation to speak of.
Right.
So what is the overlap between what the CBF does and what you do? Where are they planting oysters, and how do you guys decide?
We work with CBF to identify sites specifically for them in their programs. So their oysters that they grow through their program go on CBF specific sites, and they've got several around the bay for their different areas.
How many in the Severn?
That I don't know.
About 3 sites.
I think the ones that I know of, CBF sponsored the Asquith Reef when they put the concrete parts from the bridge reconstruction into the mouth of Asquith. They planted that. They also planted at the mouth of Weems Creek a few years back. And they also planted, I think one time, under the Jonas Green fishing pier.
They did saltworks too.
And maybe they did at the mouth of Saltworks. So they have planted different places at times. They also, at least twice in the last 7 or 8 years, where they have surplus brand new spat on shell at the end of their program, because they're setting spat on shell just like Horn Point is. And if they have surplus, say in September or October, we are a close place for them to plant on a known reef with substrate. And so they've actually overplanted on our sanctuary reef with that brand new spat on shell. Now there you've got brand new ones that have not had the benefit of a year's nursery that you're providing in the cages. So their survival is not going to be as good as the survival of what we put out there. But it's still a welcome addition to our reef. So there have been a number of overplantings like that.
Also, there's a reef made of slag in the Severn, put in by the Corps.
Well, that backs up to the substrate that was put in the Severn. And I think the earlier confusion over the numbers is we have, I think it's either 9 or 11 sites that the Corps of Engineers installed substrate back in 2006 or 7, I guess. But nothing further was done with that until we came along and said we would like one designated for our use as a sanctuary. And that's where DNR helped us negotiate the one that we have. And so we've been planting on that one designated reef for these 7 years. And that's built up, over time here. But the one you're referring to, I don't think any spat has been planted on it.
I thought it had.
CBF planted.
Eric? Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
I'm going to take a little more time because there are a couple topics that Eric alluded to but didn't quite get into with respect to the Severn.
I'll get first.
The first topic is selection of the next tributaries for intense oyster restoration. As Eric said, the Oyster Advisory Commission has deliberated over this for the last year, and I've been attending most of their meetings. They got to the point in May where they did narrow the list down to, I think you said 9. Effectively, the list was narrowed down at that point to 4, and I've heard that one of them has been eliminated. So right now, it's between the Severn, the St. Mary's, and Breton Bay. And the question about what can we do to influence the Secretary is still open. So last Thursday, I had the opportunity to stand at the podium with Mike Bush, our majority leader, Speaker of our House, and I asked Mike to get involved in this and talk to the Secretary on our behalf. That presentation that morning was led by County Executive Shue, who just 10 days before had endorsed the Severn as the river of choice in Anne Arundel County. That was a very, very significant endorsement. I hope you read it in the Capitol. But what it said was 2 things. It told DNR that the county administration is behind oyster restoration, 100%, and that it should be done in the Severn. He didn't say it should be done in Anne Arundel. He said it should be done in the Severn. And that took several months of effort to get his attention to that. And I thought he was going to make more of it last Thursday. He didn't. But nevertheless, he put that in writing to the Secretary. So we'd like to add more letters to the Secretary's consideration of why he should choose the Severn. Each of you should write to Secretary Belton and say, we're helping restore oysters on the Severn, won't you? If we've got 400 locations with cages on the Severn, and by my calculation, 1,000 people involved in this program, that's the strongest demonstration anywhere in the state of people who want the oyster restored. I mean, that's what you talked about at the beginning. The goal of the program is to get people involved with the quality of the water in the Chesapeake, on their river, on their creeks. And now it's time to say, let's do this together. Let's bring this state and the federal monies to restore the oyster to the Severn River. And what it really takes is quantity. And the question about do I do it at my dock? Or why are we planting all these in one location where we could have secretaries all over the river? This will succeed only when you get to quantity. It's been proven at Tredavon. This restoration that was completed at Tredavon is extremely successful because they now have huge quantities, millions and millions of oysters And when they get ready to spawn, there's many, many females and many, many males, and the odds of their creating larvae and spat are huge magnitude when you have that kind of quantity. And that's what we need to achieve on the Severn. I saw an example just last week. One of our growers who I had not met before, individually sponsors 50 cages. He keeps them clean. He takes them out and plants them on the sanctuary. But he watches his pier from up on high. He lives on one of those houses up high over the main part of the river in Harold Harbor. And he can look down in the spring and see that his oysters are keeping his water cleaner than his neighbors. And the result of cleaner water, he has grasses at his pier, and his neighbors don't. Those grasses are going to attract the soft-shell crabs, the little fish, and continue to create the sanctuary under his pier just because he started with the oyster cages. And I think, Mark, you've seen similar phenomena. If you get enough at your pier, you will see a difference. So I guess I'm standing here to say, don't do just 2 or 3 cages. Do 20 or 30. But you got to keep them clean, so make it realistic. But if you do enough, you'll see a difference at your own pier. And you'll contribute that many more to the sanctuary, and we'll see enough in the main stem of the river.
Bob, could
So,
you just reiterate if we want us to write a letter to the Secretary of the DNR, is that where it goes?
I think one of the governor's website would help too.
Bob, how many cages do we have out there total?
this year, this week, ORP is delivering enough spat to our 9 distributors. We have 2 of them here tonight. Thank you, Dave and Ted. Through 9 distribution points in our entire watershed, enough to fill 1,950 cages. We represent 21% of the entire MGO effort in the entire Chesapeake. Anne Arundel County represents 50% of the MGO effort, which is why SHU does include some money in the budget for MGO that helps ORP keep this effort going. So we really do lead this program, and we hope that's recognized. Question
I get a lot is, why don't more people do this? Are there any other methods out there to raising them in the cages that would be an easier way for people on the waterfront to clean and garden their oysters?
Lower maintenance.
Lower maintenance. Is there any other methods that other tributaries do than what we currently do?
Well, I mean, over the years, especially the Chesapeake Bay Foundation has tried a number of different ways. They used to have cages with made out of PVC tubing with the cage in the middle, and those you could just flip over. So that stuff would grow on the bottom. You'd flip it over, it would burn off, then you'd flip it over again. But over time, they found one, it was just too expensive, and I mean, even CBF at this point has gone to the cages that we use. So, I mean, we've tried different things over the years, but so far, I mean, this is kind of where we are.
So we have a float that has a drum. It's a PVC frame, and there are 2 sections, and there are 2 drums that are about 4 feet long, 18 inches in diameter, and you can put a lot of spat in these things.
6 cages.
I've put 2 or 3 bags in. And there's a line that runs from the dock down around the drum to a weight on the bottom. And as the tide comes up and down, the line spins the drum ever so slowly. So they're constantly turning. And when that works, it works great.
The guy who built the business building.
I'll go down and shake the cages.
Johnny Worcester
Put the
gave
drums
up.
out, and they're cleaner in the drum than they are in the cages. The problem I've had is at some point during the winter, the line breaks, the weight falls off, and the drum stops spinning. And then it's then it's hard because you got to lay down on the dock and reach down. And
it's kind of like anything. The more complicated you make it, the easier it is to break down eventually.
So I've tried a couple different lines to prevent that from happening. This year I'm thinking about actually trying stainless steel to see if that'll make it through the winter. But when that system works, it works great. If we could just crack the nut on getting it through an entire winter, it's really nice. It's zero maintenance. It just rides the tide, cleans itself.
If you guys Google SMOCS, S-M-O-C-S, St. Mary's Oyster Club did these things called SMOCS boxes that are similar to that rotate with your tidal flux.
Yeah,
if you want to come see these,
tried to engineer some other solutions. Johnny Oysterseed, who invented the revolution, came up, made a presentation. We have, I don't know, 7 or 8 of them out on the river. They did require an investment, some money, and I think he's out of business doing it. So
I asked any and all retired engineers to come back and help us out.
Yeah, it's a problem waiting to be engineered.
Does Marylanders Grow Oysters program, do they ever put oysters on the block? So it's kind of a shoreline stabilization project as well as a filtration device.
No, not so much. We've done projects in the past to try and deal with, outside of MGO, with the shellfish program. The biggest one we did over at the, trying to remember the name, at the old Horsehead Wildlife Refuge over on Kent Island, Seebeck. We built a 2-pronged reef. We have one section with rubble from Memorial Stadium and another section that's made out of fish havens, big concrete structures. The idea there was to try and use the structure and the oysters for wave attenuation because they have a really large fetch coming on. And I know that there's like communities that have used reef balls and things like that to try and for shore stabilization. But the problem is a lot of those things, if you're putting oysters on those and you're trying to stabilize things that are going to get covered with sand or whatever, you kind of can't have both.
Well, wouldn't sand bottom being a hard bottom generate natural spat or create a bottom that you could then plant for reef?
Well, the issue with that is one you have to be you'd have to be in an area that's going to get really good spat set to get those oysters, and 2, oyster reefs form over hundreds and hundreds of years, so it's not going to be a quick solution by any stretch of the imagination.
How far up the Severn can you be successfully grown? Up to Round Bay? We've had some success.
Sure.
It all depends on the salinity.
Yeah.
Our problem is more with the really muddy creeks and less than 5 feet of water. And then we don't have much success.
The ones we had on Elton Mountain. I think we lost some, but
Yeah, the further you go up any tributary, the one thing you got to look out for is big influxes of fresh water. So when a hurricane or a nor'easter comes through, or if there's a lot of snow, that spring melt, the upper reaches of the river, the salinity can drop real low. And if it does so for an extended period of time, you can get a lot of mortality. But generally speaking, yeah, you'll be able to grow them up there.
The other problem up at the headwaters is that when you get a heavy rain, you get a lot of silt still coming down out of Severn Run and some of those creeks up there, and there's a huge silt plume, and that's got to have a negative effect on the spat.
Yeah, it certainly does. Not so much for the ones in the cage, because it's not, as soon as it settles onto them, you can just shake it off. But yeah, anything on the bottom is going to get a lot of that silt. Oh, of course, my contact information is up here. If anybody has any further questions, feel free to give me a call, give me an email. I'm more than happy and respond pretty quick.